Good morning and welcome to this third session of our 2018 Men's Retreat. And you might be watching online. You may or may not be a man. That's fine. This information is powerful for you too. This morning we're going to hear from Kent Sanders. He is a professor of communication arts at St. Louis Christian College. I first met him up in Streator, Illinois, where he was our worship leader at our church. He moved on from there to become a professor of worship down at St. Louis Christian College. And he also is the creator of a podcast called Born to Create, which will be launching next week. You can find him at kentsanders.net. He has all of these things, plus a good friend. We Skype with a few friends every Monday morning and have for several years, and just encourage each other in our faith, in our walk, in our projects. And I can just say Kent is a great man of God. And he's going to talk to you about 5 lies he believed about depression, all these wonderful things he does, and yet he had this thing going on in the background of his life that he's going to share with you this morning, because maybe you are in that same spot too, and you could use this help and this encouragement to get through that. We're going to start, though, with a few worship songs with Travis and Luke and Vance, I see, and Jordan are all here. So enjoy some worship with us, and then we'll join back in with Kent's talk.
Love and mercy washing over all our sin. The people sing, Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. I see a generation rising up to take their place. Selfless faith, with selfless faith. I see a near revival stirring as we pray and sing. We're on our knees, we're on our knees. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Heal my heart and make it clean. Open up my eyes to the things unseen. Show me how to love like you and love me. Break my heart for what breaks yours. Everything I am for your kingdom's cause. As I walk from earth into eternity, Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna in the highest. Splendor of the King, clothed in majesty, let all the earth rejoice, let all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide. It trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? All will see how great is our God. Age to age he stands, and time is in his hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead three in one, Father, Spirit, and Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God?
right, and we are now going to hear from Kent Sanders. If you want to come on up, that'd be great.
Thanks, Eric, and thank you all for watching online, those of you who are doing that. Appreciate it. Okay, those of you who are here live and in person, we're not from New York, though. We're here in Illinois, so it's close. You have some handouts on your tables that say 5 lies I believed about depression. And if you want to pass those around the table, we'll be doing some discussion questions and some group discussion several times in the midst of the message. So I've basically, as I thought through, how do I do a 90-minute session? Because nobody wants to hear me talk for 90 minutes, much less myself. I thought, I'm just going to treat this like one of my college classes, and I'm going to have some discussion, and we're going to break it up that way. So hopefully that's okay to do it like that. If it's not okay, it's too late to change it anyway, so we're just going to kind of forge ahead. That was a joke. My wife says I should stop telling jokes because there's no hope at all, but I'm clinging to this tiny hope that one day I'll make it as a stand-up comedian. And that hope is slowly fading as I get older, so I'll just do what I've been called to do and trust God's leading with all that. I want to begin with a true story, and this is an absolutely true story. Throughout my whole adult life, I've had this recurring dream. I've had this dream at least a couple of dozen times. It's probably since my early 20s. Although with dreams, it's really hard to sort of remember when you've had them and how often you've had them and exactly what they were because of the nature of dreams. In this dream, I'm running somewhere, although I'm not getting anywhere. There's this shadowy, unseen force that is holding me back. It's a dark picture. Sometimes there are people around, sometimes there's not. And again, because of the nature of dreams, I don't remember all the details, but that is the one constant in this dream that I've had probably 15 or 20 or 25 times. In my whole adult life, I'm running, but I'm not getting anywhere. I'm running from something. I'm surrounded by shadows and darkness. And it's almost like I'm running in place. Now, I don't have a degree in psychology. I don't understand the depths of the human mind and our experience. And I don't understand what this dream is really about or why I even keep having it. I don't know what the force in the dream represents, if it even represents anything, or if it's some sort of something from my subconscious bubbling up, or who knows what it is. Who can really understand completely the depths of the human mind? But I do think it seems like a good metaphor for what I have struggled with my whole adult life, which is depression. And what I want to do in this session today is I want to sort of dissect this through my own experience. And I'm just going to tell you up front that I feel really unqualified to talk about this topic because I don't come at it from a clinical standpoint or psychological standpoint. I don't understand all the things that happened to me, but I do understand what I've experienced. And as I share with you parts of my story with depression, I hope that'll be valuable to you. And I just kind of want to step back and approach it like I approach everything in life, which is I try to reverse engineer things. I'm an analytical person by nature. And like we were talking at our table earlier, with some of the discussion questions with Jeff's excellent session, I was kind of sharing some of my own experiences in life. When I'm experiencing a strong emotion about something, I try to understand what's going on exactly with that emotion. Why am I upset? Why am I this or why am I that? In fact, it happened yesterday. I was replying to an email from a friend of mine. It wasn't Eric, by the way. It was a completely different situation. I was replying to this email, and you all have had this experience where you're typing an email or a text message or something, and the more that you write, the madder that you get, and the more upset that you get. And I could feel my blood pressure rising. I could feel myself getting more and more upset as I sort of responded to this message. And I thought, this isn't good. And my experience has taught me not to send a message when you're upset about something. So I waited a while to send it until I calmed down. And it was so interesting, though, because I was able to kind of step back and look at, okay, why am I upset about this? Why do I feel threatened by this thing? And it was actually a really, really small, insignificant thing looking back on it. But I think that's a helpful approach whenever we experience anything in life, is to kind of be self-reflective and self-aware enough to where we're able to step back and go, okay, what am I going through? Why am I experiencing this? What actually is going on? Instead of just punching the wall and putting a hole in the drywall, maybe stepping back and going, why am I upset and angry? And maybe we can avoid a trip to the ER or a trip to Home Depot, as the case may be, to fix the hole in the drywall, which I do have one of those in my house, which I may get to that later on. I started to experience what I would call the symptoms of depression in my late 20s. I'm 44 years old, so I've been dealing with this on and off for the better part of 20 years. And I had no reason to be depressed at the time. I worked at a church in Streator, Illinois, not too far from here. I loved the church. The staff was great. I had no external problems in my life to speak of that would have led to depression. Had been married for a few years, had a very fun music ministry at a church. I was in grad school. I was in good health. Nobody had just died in my family. It wasn't anything like that. But over time, I began to feel this sort of fog in my mind. And that's the only way that I can describe depression as I have experienced it. I would never want to assume my experience is your experience, and maybe you haven't had the experience of feeling like you struggled with depression. But if not, chances are pretty good that you know somebody who has. Maybe you're married to somebody who has, or have children or parents who struggle with depression. So even if that's not something that you have dealt with on a personal level, I'm pretty sure that you know somebody who is close to you who probably has. So this fog that I began to experience was really strange, and I didn't know how to process it. I remember one time we had a large Christmas service, and I was in charge of it. We had dozens of volunteers, and we had rented out this school for this big service. And I was rocking around trying to hold it all together because I was leading worship, but I was also sort of acting as the producer for the service. And I remember just feeling like my brain would short out at times. And it was this very odd feeling. And I all of a sudden had the realization that I think I'm dealing with depression. This isn't just feeling stressed, and it isn't just feeling sad or having the blues. I think I may be struggling with depression. So went to the doctor and began kind of the whole process of trying to deal with this in my life. And again, for me, depression does not feel like necessarily the blues or sadness. For me, depression feels like the absence of emotion. For me, it feels like a fog. It's kind of this, if you were to look at the whole world through this gray cloth, everything seems kind of like it is today. It's like gray and overcast, and there's no emotion. You don't feel anything. So whenever I hear people talk about how, as they deal with depression and, sometimes the struggle of even feeling like you can't get out of bed in the morning, I've never had that exact experience, but I understand why some people have felt that way. It's because depression can make you feel like you don't have any emotion and you just don't care. And I do understand how it can lead to feelings of wanting to take your own life. Because, if you go down that dark pit enough, you begin to not feel anything and you think, what's the point anymore? So I totally understand emotionally why people get to that place. And there have been a few times in my life where it has gotten to a scary point. And I've not shared a lot of this in a super public way before. I've shared a few things on this topic with students of mine, or things I've written on my blog, or that kind of a thing. But let me just give you a couple of examples from my own experience, and maybe you can relate to one of these. I remember one time, and this would have been in my late 20s, I was driving back from Lincoln, Illinois. I was a student at Lincoln Christian Seminary. And anybody who lives in Illinois, at least central Illinois, knows that the roads are straight and narrow and boring. And it's really easy to fall asleep on those roads at night. And when I was coming back from grad school at night, I would often get kind of drowsy. And I think this was in the wintertime, and I was just feeling very down. And you know how it gets in the wintertime, and your mood just sort of shrivels up to like an ice cube. And I was really struggling at this particular time. And I don't remember if this was on 55 or whatever highway it was, but I think it was a 2-lane road. And I remember thinking, I wonder what it would feel like if I were to just jerk my steering wheel over a couple of inches and slam right into a semi. What would that actually feel like? And I began to process that. Would I feel anything? Would I feel something for a split second and then it would all just fade into darkness? How would people grieve? Who would come to my funeral? And if you've wrestled with this before, you know that once you start down that mental pathway of starting to wonder who would be at my funeral and who would be sad and would I be missed and what would happen to all my stuff, and that's a pit that's really hard to pull yourself out of emotionally. And that really scared me because I thought, okay, I'm not actually going to do it, but if I did, what would actually happen? And I knew at that moment, okay, this is really very scary. I can remember another time, a number of years later, after my son was born. Our son, and I love my son dearly. He and my wife are the biggest blessings in my life. Of course, for any parent, that's hopefully true. But when he was born, he struggled with colic and he cried constantly, and it was just something we kind of had to get through. And I had made the really, really bad choice. We had ended the ministry. I started my teaching ministry at St. Louis Christian College. Our son was born, and we had made all these changes within a very short time. And for some reason, I had decided to go off my antidepressant medication right then. Now, if you were to ask me today why I made that decision, I would have no good answer other than I was about 30 years old, and I just kind of figured I needed to buck up and be a man, and I shouldn't need to rely on this medication to kind of help me cope with life, and that was a really stupid decision. So I was kind of in this pit anyway, but I can remember one time he was crying. I think my wife was gone. She was gone somewhere. And I just hit a wall. And he was in one room and I was in my office. And I remember literally sitting at my computer. I remember this like it was yesterday. I typed into Google ways to commit suicide. Again, not that I was going to do it, but I thought if I was going to do it, how would I actually go about it? And once you start down that pathway of actually thinking about how you would go about that and wondering, okay, how could I pull this off in a way that would be the least damaging to my family? That would be sort of the least psychologically destructive to people. And once you start sort of thinking about that, you kind of understand why people actually go through with it. And I actually have a lot of empathy for people who have gone down that road because I understand why they get there. So this morning, not to be all depressive, not to throw out a pun, I guess, I think it's important to step back and go, what is actually happening here? Why do we get to that point? And most importantly, how can we pull back from that point? Because depression in the church and in Christian circles, mental health issues, even though I think it's become more widely accepted to talk about those things, and Jeff, I'm so thankful for people like yourself who are studying this and helping us from a professional standpoint, I think there still is some stigma attached to that. So if we can step back and sort of dissect it a little bit like we did the frogs in junior high and sort of pull open the flesh, this is getting more gruesome by the moment, by the way. Hopefully you're not going to smell any formaldehyde. If we can pull it back a little bit and sort of look at what is actually going on, then I think that can be sort of a helpful thing. So this morning what I want to do is just talk about 5 lies that I believed about depression. I want to share bits of my story, and I've already been sharing a lot of my story with you. But then I also just want us to kind of talk about this in our groups. And for those who are watching online, I will share with you what the discussion questions are, and you can think about these. So if you want to grab a pen and paper or pencil and paper and make some notes, you can do that as well. Sorry, I'm a college teacher. That's just in my nature to always say that kind of thing. So I'm not taking attendance today, so you don't have to worry about that. There will not be a final or midterm exam. Before I get into sort of the meat of this, which is the 5 lies, let me give you 4 observations, kind of before we get rolling. Number 1 is you need to know that I'm not a professional counselor. I haven't studied psychology other than one course in college about 1,000 years ago. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not any of those things. So all that I'm sharing with you is my experience. I think that's valid and I think that's helpful, but I also think there's a lot of great resources, for learning more about this. So kind of take that for what it's worth. I'm not trying to give any medical advice or anything of that nature. That's sort of my disclaimer. Number 2, I'm only speaking from my own experience. Your experience, if you wrestle with depression, may be different. And I don't want to feel like I'm invalidating your experience if you haven't shared my point of view, but yet you struggle with depression or any kind of mental health issue. Number 3, and this might be the most controversial thing, is that my experience with depression has mostly been from the standpoint of a medical issue. I'm not denying that there are spiritual aspects to that. In fact, I think there are. I'm not qualified or equipped to really tell you what those are or to be able to analyze that and break all that down. I'm not anywhere near equipped to do that. But I know that for me, looking at it from the lens of a primarily medical issue has been the way that I have found success in coping with it. I'm not going to say eliminating it or getting rid of it because I don't even know if that's possible. I do believe it's a medical issue. I think science has established that. But I also think that there's certain personalities that lend themselves probably more to depression than other personalities. I tend to be a melancholy person. I'm very reflective. I tend to be oriented on the past and sort of breaking that down. And I think my personality is just oriented a little bit more toward depression. Again, whether that's clinically true, I have no idea, but that's sort of what I feel like. So I'm just going to throw that out there. I look at depression medically sort of like diabetes. There are ways you can treat it, but it also is a lifestyle issue. I think there are things that we can do in our lifestyle that do help to combat the symptoms of depression. And then finally, number 4, maybe this is most important, is I think it's important to be solution-oriented. It's very easy when we start to talk about things that are emotional, like depression or like love or other things that are kind of hard to make concrete. They're very abstract sort of things. I think sometimes it's easy to kind of get sucked down that hole and deal with it primarily through our emotions. But I also believe if we're men who want to lead ourselves well, lead our churches, our families, our communities, and businesses well, we've got to be solution-oriented. So that's where I think that looking at it from a sort of solution standpoint can really help us. Instead of kind of talking about why am I depressed and why am I sad and just keeping there, let's talk about solutions and figure out how we can deal with what I think is a very, very common problem. Does all those make sense? Okay. Well, let's dive in. Let me give you the first lie that I believed about depression, and then we'll have a kind of discussion time, and you can talk in your groups about this, as well as reflect on this if you're watching online. The first lie that I believed about depression is that I can manage my depression on my own. I can manage my depression on my own. One of my favorite movies is The Searchers from 1956. This is probably John Wayne's most famous movie, directed by John Ford, who was a very, very well-known and popular director for decades in Hollywood. I love The Searchers, even though it's very dated in many ways. I love that movie because it reminds me of my dad and my grandfather when I watch that movie. It just is kind of like an old-fashioned Western, and my dad loves Western movies. But that movie is very interesting because if you watch that movie, the very opening camera shot of that movie is it's darkness, and a door swings open, and one of the main characters, a female, walks out into the porch. Then you go through the whole movie, and if you're kind of a film geek like I am, you love this sort of nerdy film, cinematography sorts of things. The closing shot of the movie actually mirrors the opening shot, and it's so fascinating because John Wayne is the hero. He goes on this big adventure to rescue his niece, brings her back. She comes safely inside, and sorry to spoil the movie for anybody who hasn't seen it, but it's like, 60 or 70 years old, so statute of limitations on movie spoilers. So the whole movie is over, and the way that the movie closes, the closing shot is John Wayne standing framed in a doorway, and he walks off, literally, it's not a sunset, but it's close. He walks off into the desert, and the door closes, and there's darkness. And that, I think, is the image that many of us as modern males have of how we should operate in our families and society. We look at it as, I've got to be strong. I've got to do this on my own. If I can't handle my problems on my own, that automatically means that I'm weak, I'm incapable, I'm insufficient, I'm lacking in some way. We'll get to that in line number 5 a little bit more. But we fundamentally have to understand that we cannot beat depression on our own. There's no way that we can do it effectively. It has taken me, I think, most of my adult life to realize that I'm not strong enough, I'm not smart enough. It's like that Stuart Smalley thing from Saturday Night Live from decades ago, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. He said it in kind of a weird voice, but that was the gist of it. It was kind of it was a really funny thing. But that is absolutely true, is we can't do it on our own. We need a community of people around us. The problem with having a tough guy mentality, I just call it a tough guy or John Wayne mentality, is that we try to do things on our own, and what ends up happening is we sink deeper and deeper down into our problems because we're inadequate, we're incapable of solving all these things on our own, and we sink deeper down, and it's like quicksand. And if you remember from the old Johnny Quest cartoons from the 1960s and 70s, when you get into quicksand, you can't get out unless somebody throws you a rope. Or if you're in the jungle, they throw you that vine and you can start to pull yourself out. I tried to manage things on my own for way too long. And I'm an independent person by nature, and that really hurt me in a lot of ways. For the longest time, the only person who knew about my struggle with depression was my wife, Melanie. And she was very understanding and very, very supportive. But since then, I've opened up to many other friends and family, and I've been pretty open about my struggle with this over the years because I think bringing it out in the open gives people the permission to then deal with it and talk about it and seek the support and help that they need. I think that if you struggle with depression, the first person that needs to know is your wife. Now, if you're watching this and you're a female, obviously it would be your husband or a trusted friend if you're not married. But your spouse, hopefully, is a person who is supportive and who wants to help, and they need to know about this struggle. But your wife or spouse is not the only person. There are friends who need to know. Trusted friends, of course. Trusted friends who aren't going to go put a Twitter tweet about it or go on Facebook and say something about your personal and private issues. A person who is trusted and who loves you and who can support you through this journey. Let me give you a couple of examples of how I try to do this in my own life. So Eric mentioned when he was introducing me that we meet weekly, and I've been part of what's called a mastermind group for probably about 5 years. Now, don't get freaked out by that term mastermind. It's not like some maniacal, guy planning world domination. I don't know what that was, but it was kind of like a Nosferatu vampire thing. I don't know what it was, but it's not like people planning world domination. It's people who are meeting to try and help their business or their platform, their writing, or whatever it is, and just meeting and talking about business things, business strategies, trying to help one another do better. Ours, I would say, Eric, wouldn't you agree? It's kind of it's a mishmash of that, but also we pray for one another. It's personal lives. It's kind of all those things rolled into one. And that is one of the most valuable hours that I spend every single week. And we hardly ever miss, unless something has come up or we're sick or something. That is a key part of my life. So having some kind of a small group, having some type of a group of people that you're doing life with and sharing problems and getting their feedback and prayer, I think is really, really super critical. So that's been a key thing for me, but also I've tried to be more intentional with developing relationships with guys. For example, there's a guy at our church, he works on our staff, and just a couple months ago, we were kind of chit-chatting, and I've always really liked this guy. We've always kind of gotten along, and I've always just really appreciated him. And we were chatting one day backstage at church. I had played drums on a Sunday, and we were just kind of chit-chatting. And he said, hey, we should grab coffee sometime. And I said, yeah, let's do that. So we met for coffee, kind of arranged our schedules to do that. And then he said, why don't we do this every month? And I said, I think that's a wonderful idea. So this past Thursday, we got together for coffee, and that was our second monthly time. And we don't have an agenda. We just go and talk about life and leadership and families and work and things. And that has breathed really some new life into me because it's just another guy that I can sort of share the journey with. And I would encourage you to find guys to share your journey with as well. So you have your wife, your network of friends. The number 3, I think part of your network to help you do life with other people is just what I would call a larger support network that includes pastors, that includes potentially doctors, therapists, anybody who can help us deal with this. And of course, your own specific journey is going to determine what kinds of people you have in your support network, but I do believe that's important. Proverbs 15:22 says, without counsel plans fail, but with many advisors they succeed. And I hope that we will take that to heart. So you've got your sheet in front of you. The discussion question is, and we'll take 5 or 7 minutes to talk about this. The discussion question is, are you trying to manage life on your own, or do you have a solid support network in place to help you through depression and other struggles of life? So let me read that again for our online audience. Are you trying to manage life on your own, or do you have a solid support network in place to help you through depression and other struggles of life? And if so, maybe share who some of those people in your support network are. So let's take 5 or 7 or 8 minutes and talk about this.
Last deal about when I had the surgery, I was really nervous about it. I had five. That was I was scared. Yes, I had to deal with it. That's something I need to talk to them. Deal with it. That's what I do.
Some people, I think you and others, a lot of us, it's really hard to say, I really want to get to know somebody. So, there's a small group, and then outside the small group, or outside the small group, the guys, making sure that working through us have more time. One who actually does that, that is huge. In which case you say, I guess I'm not sharing how do I get what am I feeling? What God help me to feel? I started and even though I to your question, to me, I you see people who get kind of stuck in that bitterness and anger, and years later, they're still so bitter. That was a huge lesson. A lot of wisdom as far as how long should we start taking it all of your expectations of your past as the new person and all that type of thing. And then God used that as a lesson. Probably 5 or 6. So that's against my nature.
You know what I would do here?
Probably one
Oh,
of the
you're
biggest
probably
things
different.
that my clients also.
I just want to walk more. I want to go here. Pakistan and stuff, I don't know.
I got He always has
I just want to go
two
back
big
at
ones.
my sister, I take well, this guy, well, back.
It really
I
is.
got that stuff, cancer, stuff like that. Back there, double down, home today. Carry my cancer here. My dad had to have it on the side. Now, so, her mom, we had like 200 farmland, I had a lot of.
Maybe
My mom. Yeah, sure, it's still. Put them on fire. Just being
What else you doing?
Okay, I'll give you all a couple moments to wrap up your discussion. Okay, let's move on to line number 2. You probably guessed that all of these quote-unquote lies that I'm sharing are really the opposite of the strategies that we should be implementing into our lives to help us to be healthy and men who are strong and able to lead in our communities and our families. Line number 2 is self-medicating my pain is an effective coping strategy. Self-medicating my pain is an effective coping strategy. Now you see kind of the nonsense of these lies. None of us, when presented these on a rational level, would believe any of these. But that's assuming that we actually are rational people. We were talking last night, I forget what the context was, but we were talking about how we don't operate out of rationality or logic, or we don't do things that make sense as guys. I mean, why do men get into all kinds of things that are damaging to ourselves and to society and our families? Well, it's because we act out of emotion, not out of logic most of the time. As men, we think we're so logical, but we're really not. We're just as emotional as anybody else is. We just maybe have a good way of masking it sometimes. We can justify our actions pretty well. I think all of us have, I was going to say all of us have a drug of choice, but I would say really all of us have drugs of choice. All of us have multiple things that we turn to ease the pain that we're going through. For some people, it's emotional pain, it's relational pain, it's physical pain. It's different types of things that we use to numb the pain that we experience in life. Pain of our failures, pain of relationships, pain of lack of success in our vocational lives that we perceive sometimes, maybe the pain of parenting or the pain of being a child. from childhood, whatever that pain is, all of us have things that we turn to that we medicate ourselves with. One of the things that I use to medicate myself is food. I love fast food. I mean, when I say I really, really like fast food. My weaknesses are White Castle, KFC, and Steak and Shake, and Culver's. You know, I love all those things, and it's so easy for me, and, you know, maybe I should admit this sort of in public, but I guess it's too late now, is, you know, if I'm feeling down or if I'm feeling bored, you know, boredom is a form of pain. If you're feeling bored or down or upset about something, it's so easy to just eat to sort of numb the pain, because eating is pleasurable, and fast food is especially pleasurable. And it is well, I was going to say it's not unusual. It's not like I do this every day, but, you know, there are times if I'm feeling upset about something, I'll run through White Castle and I'll get 4 or 5 sliders and some fries, and, you know, they have all kinds of goodies at White Castle. And, you know, it's easy to say to my 14-year-old son, hey, let's go take a run to White Castle, and sort of, you know, in my own mind, I'm thinking, hey, I get to go to White Castle, but I'm sort of presenting it as, oh, let's go to White Castle. It's a father and son thing. And, you know, in the process, I'm sort of teaching him to eat bad food. And so there's all kinds of negative things that come from this. But it's a vicious cycle, you know, where we do things to numb our pain, things that damage us in the long run, or that are unhealthy, or somehow take us more downward on that spiral of pain and boredom in life. But ironically, those things cause more pain. They cause more suffering in our lives. And it's just this cycle where we keep going down and down and down. So self-medication is not a good coping strategy, because it's coping with it. It's not healing. It's not presenting a solution to it. When you're going through a painful time, whatever that pain may be, it's hard to see the next day. It's hard to see beyond that. It's hard to see even sometimes to the next hour, because you just want to feel better. The truth, though, is that we cannot run from our pain. We have to face our pain. And we have to ask the hard questions about the behavior that is making things worse. There's no easy solutions. We just have to face whatever the pain is and try to work through those things. Sometimes it requires professional help. Maybe it's a therapist or a counselor or a doctor. Hopefully our spouses are part of that solution, and our support network that we've already mentioned. But we have to face the pain that is within our lives and figure out, how do we deal with that pain? I know for me, just to be honest with you, this is a very small example, and probably all of you can relate to this, is if I'm writing, so I do some side stuff where I write and edit and so forth, and writing is hard work. You know, anybody who's ever written stuff, it requires a lot of mental concentration. Writing sermons, lessons, books, it all requires concentration. And it is easy to feel like, oh, I've been writing for an hour, I'm just mentally fried, I just want to zone out. And I will admit that one of my zone out things is I love Star Wars. I'm kind of a Star Wars geek. And there's this guy on YouTube who makes these several videos every day. It's like, leaked details about episode 9. What's going to happen with Luke? Or Rey had a son. Could this be, you know, a Sith? Or if you're not into Star Wars, just totally disavow everything I just said, because you have no idea what I'm talking about. It's okay. Replace that with whatever your favorite indulgence is as far as entertainment. But it's so easy for me to say, I've been working too long, I've got to zone out and do this. And then 45 minutes later, I've watched 10 of these things, and then I've not gotten anything else done. You know, so even a simple thing like that, we've got to face the thing that's causing us pain and work through it. And that can mean a whole bunch of different things depending on what our situation is. So here's the discussion question. Are you trying to medicate your pain in life with a vice or a bad habit? And what pain are you running away from in your life? Something is driving us to seek out pleasure, or to seek out to try and numb the pain or the boredom or the negative emotions that we're experiencing. And are we trying to medicate our pain with some type of bad habit or food or whatever it is? And what is that pain? So that's kind of a deep discussion question. You can go as deep as you want to with that. But let's take a few minutes and talk about that in our groups.
I will say this, I think God named it, I don't know closer to it.
No, I really like the food. I really like it's sort of like anyways. Every once in a while, I have a trip. I don't know if there is anything. Oh, look, this guy. Oh, what's this? Oh, this is a big hour. I know.
Something I like to do with myself.
But
One of my reporters have found online, whatever, it's taken up time. Normally I like to watch the first service. Oh, I need to get this one book. Now, I'm already out of just because I was also, I don't have the game on it, but I stayed away from it. I don't know. No, it's the same game. I just haven't looked on that.
Okay, I'll give you a couple moments to wrap this up.
I just want to get this up.
Okay, let's move on to number 3. I feel like I'm cutting you off just as you're beginning to get going. But it's past 10:30, which means, every guy is thinking about lunch already. So there's like a statute of limitations on, breakfast has been over for a couple hours. Now we're thinking about lunch, or maybe that's just me. I did bring up White. Well, you brought up In-N-Out Burger. I mean, we've got like this competition going over here, listing all of our favorite places. Nobody mentioned Taco Bell yet, so that's okay. I'm leading you down into a sinful path. What is it?
Green Gables out like Louisiana, where I live.
I've never heard of that.
They got
Is it good?
cheeseburger and the best cheese balls too. They got these cheddar cheese balls that they batter and they deep fry.
What do you think deep fried is good? I mean, you could take nothing and deep fry it, and I would still probably try it at least. Okay, let's go into lie number 3. Line number 3 is, I have no control over the forces that make my depression worse. I have no control over the forces that make my depression worse. This essentially is where we say, hey, life happens. I have no control over anything that happens to me or how I respond. In other words, it's basically saying, I'm just a passive bystander to my own life, which is obviously not good. Let me explain what I mean by this, though. You might struggle with depression, and let's take our example of diabetes once again and use that as an analogy. So if you're a diabetic, you have a condition there are aspects of that you can't control. You have the condition, but there are things that you can do that will make it worse. For example, if you eat a lot of fast food, or you have a lot of ice cream every day, or you're eating foods or doing things that are making your health worse, those are forces that you can control. So in other words, there is the element that you have no control over, and there's the element that you do have control over. And when you put those together, it makes the situation way, way worse. Many times, I don't know how you approach life as a man, but there are many times where I just kind of want to check out. I want to veg on Netflix. You know, my natural state of things is to be passive, and I want to watch 10 hours of Netflix, and I don't even want to go out of the house. I just want to have the guy from Grubhub come and deliver to my house and not even get up out of my chair. That's our natural state. So it takes energy, and it takes this not being passive, but being active and being assertive and aggressive in our lives. We've got to fight against these things. There are 3 specific things that I fight against in my life, and maybe you can relate to these. These are 3 things that make my depression worse. And even within the last 6 months, there have been a couple of times where I felt myself sort of sliding down. You know, not like I'm going to take my own life, and not anything like that, but just I can feel myself, I'm sliding down into that valley of letting depression sort of get its claws around me a little bit again. And every time that happens, I know that one or more of these factors are at play. These are stress, fatigue, and conflict. Let me break this down really, really briefly. First of all, stress. And once again, I'm going to throw this out there. This is my own experience. It may not be yours, but I think probably it's more true for most of us than not. I get stressed whenever I have too many things going on, whenever I'm too busy, or when I have too many expectations, and most of which I've set up for myself, so I have nobody else to blame. What I've started doing the last couple of years is saying no to more things in my life. The problem with saying no to things, though, is that when somebody asks you to do something or participate in something, when you say no to them, that is going to be disappointing. And so you kind of have to decide that you're okay with disappointing people, and that you kind of accept the reality that you can't make everybody happy in your life. And for a people pleaser like me, who is very congenial, I like to get along with everybody. I like to have everything to be on an even keel with people. That's difficult, honestly. That's really, really difficult. But the reality is that whenever people ask us to do something and we say no, they're probably just going to move on to the next person. And it may be a bigger deal to us than it actually is to them. I'm only trying to say yes to the things that are really the most important things to me. And it's almost like you have to switch your default answer in life. Many times our default answer is yes. Can you do this? Yes. Will you help me with this? Yes. Can you help me with this? Yes. Can you come and speak, or can you come and teach, or can you come and help me, or help with this ministry, or whatever the thing is? And our answer is always yes. What I have found is that switching my default answer to no actually has helped me a lot. So the answer is always no. It's always no. Doesn't matter what it is, the answer is always no, unless there's a compelling reason for me to say yes. And let me just break this down for you very, very specifically. Why did I say yes to come and being involved in this retreat? Well, there's really a couple reasons. One is that I'm trying to increase my public speaking skills, so this is helping me. Also, hopefully I can help a few people with struggling through their own depression. And if I've offered something helpful, that's a win in my case. Also, I get to spend time with Eric, who's a wonderful friend of mine, so that's a win in my case. Those are really the 3 main reasons. Other than my wife probably wanted to kick me out of the house for a couple days, because I tend to be kind of a homebody sort of person. And she was like, go have fun with the guys and everything. So that's probably a win as well. But there are a lot of things that I say no to, and that's totally okay. You know, when we look at the Gospels, we see that Jesus said no to a lot of things. You would think of anybody in history, Jesus would have been the one person to always say yes to everybody's needs, but he didn't. In fact, the Gospels tell us about times whenever Jesus would go away from the crowds intentionally to get away to his own quiet place. Excuse me. So if you look at like Mark chapter 1 and Luke chapter 5, you see that Jesus took time to get away from the crowds, to restore his own energy, and to restore some margin in his life. So if Jesus needed to have times where he got away from people, then you and I need to do the same thing as well. So stress is one factor. Fatigue is another factor. And there are a couple of things that have helped me in this regard over the last year or so, as I have started to try and take control over my energy level. I notice when I'm tired, I get more depressed. So I've tried to start going to bed earlier. I take more naps, and I exercise several times a week. Usually that's a walk. Sometimes I'm trying to go running more, but I don't like running that much. But any exercise is better than no exercise. But I have noticed that whenever I have more energy, that helps with my depression. And then number 3 is conflict. I hate conflict, and maybe you do as well. So I try to resolve conflicts as quickly as possible with people, whether it's in my own family or whether it's with coworkers or family members or whoever it is. Now, there's 2 other things that I do that I've been starting to do more lately. Well, one is more lately. The other one I've done for years. One is journaling, and the other is meditation. I've journaled ever since I was a teenager. And I don't do it every day, but I do it several times a week. And that for me has been enormously helpful in giving me a space to vent my feelings, to work out my thoughts on things, and I did it even just a couple of days ago. I was just all out of sorts one morning. I couldn't even tell you why. And I literally wrote down in my journal, why am I so feeling out of sorts today? And I wrote down, here's like 7 things that are making me feel out of sorts. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I had a conflict. Maybe I was really busy that day. And I just listed that out. And that really helped me to kind of put down on paper, here's why I'm feeling so upset. And when you put it down on paper, it has a way of taking the power away from it. So that you go, well, if this is why I'm upset, then those are silly reasons, so I can choose to have a joyful day. That to me has been helpful. And meditation has been very helpful too. Just taking that quiet time and being quiet and meditating and being still. So here's the discussion question. What are some proactive ways that you are dealing with stress, fatigue, and conflict in your life? Because for me, and perhaps for you as well, those are 3 factors that can make depression a lot worse in life. So how are you dealing with stress, fatigue, and conflict in your life? And for those who are watching online, again, if you want to grab a pencil and paper and think through those as well, I think that can be helpful. So let's take 5 or 6 minutes to discuss those in our groups.
So coming back to dinner.
Very wise man.
Thank you for coming. There were times when I you got a lot of requests to do it all. I just want to share that. You guys Nice to meet you. Well, this is good and
You know what, Travis? Some of us are nerds. Oh, you can't just throw that out there. Stop there. Now you got
No, that doesn't always have to use.
That's the point. Barney, I would say. It's not a shortage. You have an ongoing
Sorry.
That's big. So,
I just want to get your seats in, Bill.
yeah. And it's fine.
That helps not to.
He's a raccoon.
Oh, that's important.
He's a raccoon. Like even, and it seems very good. And
I have but
it's just,
it's not so many else. It's like
it's
like a minimum 1 hour session. To be productive, I'm like, I can't carve out 2 hours. There might as well.
what's the greatest stress within your family?
I'm like, even if I'm the only one in the house, like, I'm not gonna like talk to my favorite word. That just makes me feel really good. Like maybe it's something that needs to do, like, right now, that's not.
Yeah, I can't really. He's shooting So I just think, can't you find a way to, because I'm also in salt that is you. A lot of that is it's about ourselves. And we talked about that's not the now.
Okay, let's wrap up this section. I feel like I'm just getting you going every time, and then I'm just like killing it off. Still good? Let's move on to, actually, let's do these last two. I'm going to go ahead and sort of wrap this up there. Then you can discuss as long as you like. Let's do these last two lies. Lie number 4 is I don't need professional help. I don't need professional help. Now, there's a lot of reasons why people avoid getting professional help. You know, it's the same reasons why sometimes as men, we don't go to the doctor because we think, it'll take care of itself, or I can handle it. It's not that bad. You know, there's a lot of reasons why sometimes we avoid getting professional help with things that are obviously getting worse. There is one major reason to do so, though. That is because there are some things that a professional therapist or a counselor can only help us with. You know, it's great to have our support network and spouses and pastors, but there are some things that only professionals who have studied this and who've gone to school for this and who really understand the intricacies of and the dynamics of depression and mental health and all those things. There are some things that only they can really help us with. I'm not ashamed at all to tell you that there have been times in my life where I have seen a therapist and a counselor. There was a time in my 20s where I did, and there was a time in my late 30s where I did for several months. And I'll be honest with you, I think he was helpful. Obviously, I'm not going to say he was, but he was helpful to a degree, but there are in ways that he wasn't helpful. So, sometimes I think a therapist or a counselor is like medicine in the sense of it takes a few to kind of figure out what works for you and a person who can help you. And, not every client and every therapist are going to be right for each other. In my late 30s, there came a time where I felt there wasn't any particular reason why I went to a therapist. I felt lost and directionless. And it really wasn't until later where I kind of discovered that, well, this is something that a lot of guys, I should have been clued into it because I was getting ready to turn 40. So that should have been my first clue, that a lot of guys around 35 to 40, they just kind of feel lost. And it's sort of like, well, I've achieved some goals and now I feel very aimless and rudderless in life. And he was able to help me with a few things for sure. Doctors, I think, can be an indispensable resource. I know doctors for me have been really, really helpful because they can identify medical things that are going on with depression or with your health or with other kinds of things. For me, I'll just throw this out there. Again, I'm not at all giving medical advice by any stretch of the imagination. I'm only telling you my own experience. My own experience with medication depression is that it took me a while to find something that really worked for me, that didn't have crazy weird side effects and all those kinds of things. That's why I do hear that a lot with people whenever I have these conversations, is the side effects of some medicines are crazy and bad, and that's true. For me, it took a while to find something that really worked, and I'm thankful that I stuck it out and found something that really helped me. So seeing a doctor, therapist, or a counselor can be an investment of time and of money and resources, but what is your life worth? Do you want to have a life that is fully engaged and where you feel alive and awake and present and aren't just kind of sleepwalking through life? For me, that's worth an awful lot. And, for a small investment, I think your quality of life can definitely go up. So the discussion question for there, and we'll hold this off till after I'm finished here, is why do you think most men have a hard time admitting they need professional help or counseling? I was talking with actually a friend of mine who's a pastor. He's about 15 years younger than me. He's a pastor at a church. He said, I've been going to a counselor and it's really, really been helpful. And I said, I'm really thankful that you, first of all, trusted me with that information. And second of all, that you took steps to do this. And I said, I believe every pastor, every Christian leader, I think everybody should at times have professional help because it helps you to work through the difficulties and the complexities of life. And to me, the sign of somebody who's healthy is they realize, hey, I'm not healthy, and I want to have somebody to help me to get healthy. The unhealthy person is the one who is suffering and who says, I don't need help. I can do this on my own. That to me is a huge sign of that something is wrong. Let's go into line number 5. Line number 5 is my struggle with depression means that I am deficient in some way. My struggle with depression means I am deficient in some way. There is kind of a stigma attached with mental health and depression where, as guys, we say, oh, I should be able to handle it on my own, and that something must be fundamentally unmanly or wrong with me if I can't manage my life without some type of support network or something else. But I don't think that's the case at all. The truth is that you're not deficient. You're not incomplete. You're not any less of a man when you deal with your depression in a healthy way. However, I will say this. I'll throw this out there. I think there is one thing that makes you not a man. And I think that is when you recognize something's wrong, but you don't do anything about it. Because our lives are not just about us. Our lives are also about our spouses. They're about our kids, our grandkids. If you have grandkids, they're about the people that we serve in our jobs or our church. It's not just about you, and it's not just about me. It's about, hey, I've got these responsibilities. If I'm suffering, if I'm going through something traumatic, if I'm not the person that I need to be, I'm responsible to these people for being the best version of myself that I can be. It doesn't mean we don't have problems, but it does mean that, hey, I recognize something is amiss here and I've got to deal with it. I think that real men face up to their problems and they do something about them. Now, what that is specifically obviously depends on the situation, but I think that we have to take action and do something to help ourselves to be healthier and to be the best godly version of ourselves that we can be. You know, it's not a sin to struggle with depression. It's not a sin to struggle with something. I mean, my goodness, when you read the book of Job, it seemed like that he was depressed at times. You know, if you read the Psalms, it seems like King David had his times of sadness and depression. If you look at the prophet Elijah, it looked like he was pretty down a couple of times. If you look at Jonah, he was pretty down, you know, at least one time, and he was angry. And people of God deal with all kinds of emotions. The question is, what do we do with those emotions, and do we do something healthy with those in the correct way? So to kind of summarize here, I've got 5 things at the bottom of your handout, and these are just 5 simple action steps. Number 1 is get a support network. Number 2, face your pain, don't medicate it. Number 3, proactively deal with stress, fatigue, and conflict. Number 4, seek professional help if you need. And number 5, don't view yourself as deficient. I know I've covered a lot of ground in this. I hope this is helpful to you on some level. Once again, this topic filtered through my own experience. If you'd like to chat more about this, if I can help in some way, feel free to send me a Facebook message or get in touch. I'm happy to chat and pray with you and do what I can to help. Otherwise, I guess we'll conclude this session and have some more discussion time.
Thanks so much, Kent. And so we're going to discuss here in the room these last 2 questions. And if you want to discuss them, I'll be posting some of these action steps here at the end. And, you know, I'll just say again, Kent, I didn't know you struggled with depression. I've known you for years and years and years. And he's happy-go-lucky. He's successful. He's well-adjusted. He's in ministry. He's a professor. He's, you know, everything you would think. And it was only when he shared, you know, one day that he had struggled with depression. He talked about his lifelong things, you know, in a personal conversation with me. And I just said, wow, this is really shocking to me. And I would never have guessed, but, you know, no judgment on it. Just, I would never have guessed this. And you may know people too. You may be one of those people yourself. But it's a topic that we just don't talk enough about. So I'm really thankful that you would talk about it. You talk about it publicly and you'd share it openly. And I think that's a great part of healing too, is just continuing to bring it into the light so Satan doesn't have a grip on it, and get some guys around you that can help. And so I just really appreciate that. And if you're in that situation too, I want to encourage you, do these action steps that Kent says. Find a support network, face your pain, don't medicate it, proactively deal with your stress, fatigue, and conflict, seek professional help, and don't view yourself as deficient. So thanks for all that. Kent's going to join me this afternoon at 4 o'clock for one more session, and we're going to be doing 2 podcast interviews live and unscripted here, and on 2 topics, going after your dreams, which Kent is great at and I love to do too, and also why everyone should consider writing a book, which I think you'll find very fascinating too. So hope you'll join us for that as well.